Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dion Vernon, Senior Director of Talent Management and Organizational Planning for Comcast. I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, who happens to be a colleague and a friend, Chris Hester, who is Senior Director of Talent and Learning Solutions at Comcast. Today, Chris is going to share with you how to innovate talent acquisition and development through artificial intelligence, aka AI. Please open the chat box and share your comments and questions at any time throughout the session. Chris is going to answer your questions at the end, so please hold them. Also, I would just want to give a huge thanks to Chris for sharing his insights today on AI. And Chris, the podium is now yours.
Thank you, Dion, and thank you to everyone who has joined today as well. I'm very excited for this opportunity and for the chance to share some of my own personal insights. As Dion mentioned, I'm with Comcast, and I spent many years prior with Capital One, Accenture. So I would say, in a way, this sort of journey of talent and AI, machine learning, it's something I've certainly seen over my career, and I think it's really moving into a place where we can all really start to talk about it, should embrace it, and start thinking more proactively about it in our HR practices. So just a brief snippet of what you're going to see today. So yes, really today, a couple of things. We're going to be talking about talent acquisition and talent development using machine learning and AI. We'll definitely are going to cover off on a couple of different topics. We've already done the introduction part, which is fantastic. And I'm looking forward to some meaty and interesting questions down the end. So again, as Dion mentioned, please do not hesitate. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is the HR operating model and maybe what in the world and in the industry is fueling some changes. A bit then about what is AI and machine learning? What's the difference in between those two? There are some very distinct differences. But also more than that, what are some of the common ecosystems or where you might start to see some of these technologies show up? I then want to dig into and really bring this group through a section that is going to go into how do we leverage skills and machine learning together to really power the entire talent experience. So again, back to that talent acquisition, talent development, all of those different processes, even your performance management. How can we start to tap into some of these new technologies and really seek to improve the overall employee, candidate, but also the entire corporate experience? And in many ways, I would say, if you're thinking about broad candidate pools, the experience for many people who may be interacting with your company. And then lastly, again, we'll open up for questions. So let me start with this. If you think about the HR operating model, and it may depend on where your particular company may be at this time, there are a couple of key paradigms that you would want to think about. And one happens to be, what we might say is a journey-based model. A lot of organizations in the market now are moving to this organizational journey flow to really capture and hone in on the employee experience or the moments that matter. In a way, it's almost the employee value proposition, and it's kind of the North Star, is we really want to make certain journeys valuable, and we really want to enhance those for the particular employees. And if you can hone in on that particular experience or all of the myriad of experiences that may fall within a journey, you can start to create a really cohesive product. Obviously, then another key paradigm here, and I would say sort of the newer operating models within HR, is automating and using data. Those can go hand in hand, they can be side by side. I think actually the relevance here is when you think about automate, whether that is AI, whether that could be some chat bots, some other automated processing technologies, or even the machine learning aspects, you actually start to gain additional data and insights as well too. So it really does allow, individuals information at their fingertips, but information for leaders, for our business, and for other stakeholders. And lastly, I'd say one of the big items is consistency. When you have a very large corporation, or even a small corporation, the amount of variation in your business processes or your HR processes just creates more rigor. It creates more opportunities for issues, and candidly, it creates less of a simplified, holistic experience that every employee or candidate or member of that organization would experience. And so it can create some very sort of disparate processes and some disparate experiences. So if you think about it, and we look in with these lenses here, we're trying to be journey based, right? Automate, and then really think about consistency. That can help steer maybe some of the direction of this. What does success look like? All of us, if we had a whiteboard, could probably imagine what we might say success would look like at our own individual company. But honestly, the way I sort of think about it is in three key areas. If we can enhance the employee experience, bringing parity, I think that is very important because you really have to look at employees at all levels, all regions, locations, everything else, right? If you can enhance those experiences with parity and make it into a digital customer or consumer grade experience, then you're starting to move the needle. Then employees or other members of your population may start to say, oh, this experience feels more like something I would do in my day-to-day life with a smartphone, with my own personal laptop, PC, whatever it may be. So that is one of the main sort of success goals. Can we create experiences within HR that mimic or are similar to what people may be living in the rest of their daily lives, right? This is an example where if you think in the talent space and you're thinking about maybe how do we assess skills? Well, why wouldn't you start to anticipate how could you gamify or use some gamification or other techniques that could gain insights, right? By individuals going through that process, something people do all the time, play games, work with friends, whatever it may be, right? It's an opportunity to go back and to reimagine how can we create experiences like that that are part of the HR journey. The other really is how can we deliver solutions that allows people to do their jobs effectively? At the end of the day, that is my biggest goal, I would say, out of this is, can we gain efficiencies? Yes, that'd be great. Can things be consumer grade? Absolutely. But really, you have to hunker down and say, we want people to be able to do their jobs effectively, clearly, and with as much laid out and as much ease and use through the process as possible. And of course, a big play here when you think about this automation and data journey, right, is how do we reduce different time, expenditure of labor, your own personal time, whether that be with leaders, candidates, employees across the board. How can we really hone in and focus on that? So if all three of those were sort of success metrics or goals, that's how you can start to look at, and certainly how many companies start to look at how do we start to dip our toes into this market, or even market probably being the wrong word. How do we dip our toes into this new arena? Many of you probably have already. I would say that it is a very unfettered, unshackled sort of world out there where there is so much opportunity. And it's just time of prioritizing, seizing, and going after that. So I just said prioritizing. A couple of things I would want to say. When we're looking at AI and ML, at any company, again, you always have to think about, and this goes for any HR project, but in particular, I would say as we look at these prioritization lenses within artificial intelligence, machine learning lens, they become even more relevant. So again, improving the employee experience, touched on that. Everything should be tied back to that employee value proposition and tied back to journeys where it makes sense. The big thing is, are we delivering automation and self-service? Of course, where it makes sense. So are we enabling individuals to be able to do, and I usually use this phrase, what they want, when they want, how they want, right? And that means trying different modalities. That means trying different tools. That means delivering suggestions and information back to individuals and helping out. When we think about the next, standardizing, streamlining, simplifying, right? We hit on this on the prior slide. So much of this goal can come in, but if you're looking and you're saying, oh, I've got 10 projects I need to think about, thinking about standardization and streamlining along with some of these other lenses would absolutely help you. Maybe if your goal was to lean more into AI or ML, it certainly may help tilt the needle one way or the other, right? If you're kind of on the fence on a particular effort. And of course I would say, business value. There's no mistaking the ability for AI or ML to absolutely, save time, to save money, create efficiencies in organizations, to allow other people, other talent to be able to do other types of activities. If you can automate a process, that creates some free time, perhaps, that allows a group of individuals who might have been doing manual work the chance to do something else, maybe that is more business value focused. So again, maybe some of these are obvious, some are probably fairly familiar, but this is how I would say as we look into this space, these would be some of the prioritization lenses I would look at, and even some of the areas where I would dig into if you were doing a business case, right? How could you articulate each of these points with a particular effort and how it may be driving the work? I think one of the most common questions I get on a regular, literally on a daily basis, and it changes, I'm going to be honest with you, as this entire spectrum has grown, and let's say I think it's grown significantly in the last 5 to 6 years within the HR industry in particular. The phrase, what is the difference between AI and machine learning? Okay. So this is what I would say is the current best case explanation for that. Artificial intelligence really is putting human intelligence into our machines, right? Whether that's a system, a platform, a process, some sort of technology. And so basically, a machine is actually completing the tasks or doing the work itself smartly without any human intervention whatsoever. It may actually learn. It could be set up to run certain protocols. It can be programmatically designed. But artificial intelligence is something where, in many ways, you have something that is doing the work on your behalf as an individual, and it is actually taking over many of the different tasks and activities that an individual or a human may do. Of course, there are scenarios where there are some artificial intelligence tools that do provide inputs into the HR journey, or are tools, there are a number of vendors, I don't know if I'm allowed to start naming them off, so I'm not, but there are a number of vendors that offer some AI capabilities if you were in the recruiting space, for example, and you wanted to get to better candidate matches, or if you wanted to dig in maybe on some of your DE&I scenarios, there are different ways that AI can help the organization anticipate that. But I'll leave it there for now. I did throw on a nice pretty Alexa icon here. Actually, I think it's an Echo Dot 2 or something. I'm not quite sure. But if you think about it, Alexa voice assistant is probably a great example of an AI product. It does use machine learning because it does remember what I have told it. It does learn intelligently, and it starts to get smarter about how it may interact or respond back to me. Machine learning, on the other hand, really is an application of AI. It's a technique, for lack of a better word, for realizing elements of this artificial intelligence. So if you think about, and I hate to say this gets really scientific and boring here, but if you think about using sort of modeling or mathematical modeling of data and decision trees, and you have key input criteria, it really starts to, in this respect, machine learning starts to pick up on cues without direct instruction, without direct coding. It usually uses algorithms that are decision tree and data point focused, where they will come out and they may make suggestions. Machine learning is something where you may actually you might receive counsel or guidance on an activity based on attributes about yourself, but essentially it is a platform or a technology that is learning by nature of those it interacts with. And usually it is algorithm driven based results. Again, on the right here, there's some decision tree examples, but machine learning, that's how they vary. They are slightly different tools and techniques. They bleed over. So it does get confusing because you have some that are AI machine learning, some machine learning AI, some that are strictly each other. So I would just say this, if you're ever in doubt, certainly go and do some research. Just know there is a subtle difference as we start to talk about these. So let's talk about this. Let's get into some meat. Those are some sort of overview, introductory sorts of concepts. I will say, just for example purposes, the AI and the machine learning ecosystem can include a variety of technologies. So many folks have probably seen chatbots. If you have not seen a chatbot or employed a chatbot, for example, it can be a great way to sort of dip your toes into this space. Chatbots, obviously, they are some machine learning, some are some AI. But for example, if you're HR service and you're getting deluged with calls, in many cases, a chatbot that could be have programmatic responses based on your questions and serves up self-service articles, answers to your questions. We interact with this all the time on our phones, right? If we're doing a banking transaction and we need help, or if we want to get some information, right? That is a sort of concept here. There are other things where you can use, some different automation technologies to do automated audits or do automated file loads, right? So that's an example. Many companies, I would say that Comcast is starting to move into this space, is thinking about automated testing. So can you actually say, I want to run a certain set of tests, here's my data set, that can achieve savings transactions. There also exists just general automated processing. So bots. This is a concept, I remember this 5 or 6 years ago was my first time working with a bot. And essentially it was where there was a very repeatable action that happened. And this time it was around a performance management scenario. And someone was going in and doing a same transaction over and over and over again, or checking back. We were able to build a bot that did that work for that individual. So a bot can be built in many different ways, or contextually or systematically, to help to automate and really move the needle on some of the more, I'd say, routine, maybe some of the mundane tasks, somewhere you have to check back frequently. I will mention this. WalkMe happens to be a platform. It is a vendor specifically, but is a digital adoption platform. And I wanted to call that one out because some of the things I don't think people quite always realize is when you think about AI or ML, having subtle cues or having text that can appear when needed, maybe when you hover over, or maybe when you're on a page for too long, or you're looking for information. Some of these digital adoption platforms or help tools within a system can provide an extreme amount of value. And of course, lastly, I would say your HR platform, whatever that may be, and maybe you're not on a giant ERP, a Workday, let's say, Success Factors, maybe you're on multiple platforms, but your core HR platforms, most all of them in the modern day, have some elements of machine learning or AI tied into them. Even if you have a point solution, maybe that is not part of your core HR platform, if you think about talent learning, maybe you have assessments being done by a third party, or learning being administered by a third party provider that isn't your core platform. Well, those can integrate, and many of those point solutions have additional AI or ML capabilities that you may want to bring into the mix. So just the ecosystem can be very mixed, and many things are on the table or off the table. So this is these are some examples. If we think about what could an AI or ML roadmap start to look like, and I'm certainly not going to drain this slide. There's a lot of context here, but what I would say is roadmap. I've learned this the hard way. People will suddenly start to say AI, machine learning, automate, simplify, time efficiencies, and things start coming out of the woodwork. And it becomes almost an onslaught of how can we advance this agenda in a very quick, expeditious way, for lack of a better word. And I think what I would answer back is you need to plan. You really need to think further out, because when you start digging into career well-being, career growth, talent acquisition, many of your core HR processes, there are many other things that are already on that litany of work that needs to be done. So you really have to think about what is the roadmap or the strategy. Also factor in the change, the adoption curve for all of your employees, your leaders, your managers. That takes time. And so to those who may say, hey, we've got this great idea, certainly pilots are a good idea, try things. The reason this whole slide is here is because I think it is critically important to say, here's what may be available. Let's start to plan it out. What are we going to tackle, say, in the next 6 months? What's our goal 6 months later, right? After that, what could things start to look like? If you can start to frame up a roadmap with your tech partners, with your key business stakeholders, if you have, each of your HR centers, whether that might be talent or whether that's compensation benefits, If you can start to have those conversations and start to align, a roadmap absolutely will help move the needle there. And, and here is an example. I mean, it's illustrative, absolutely. But what I would call out here is there are many things available now in the talent and learning space where there's a lot of ML capabilities available. I will say at Comcast, we happen to be using a lot of functionality that is driven out of our core HR platform. So we are leveraging a lot of capabilities there, but we are leveraging things outside of that as well. So a couple of things I just thought I would throw out. Imagine a world, right, where you apply for a job and suddenly you load your resume and the system or something comes back and says, oh, it looks like you have these 10 skills. Would you like to add them onto your profile, your candidate profile? Okay, great. How would you assess your skills? Candidate's like, oh, okay, let me do a self-assessment here. And what if those skills that were then added to your candidate profile suddenly brought you with job suggestions and said, oh, hey, Chris, it looks like you got these skills. Instead of you just searching for the job or the one that someone referred you to, let's suggest some other ones that might be good fits for you based on your skills, your prior experience, your time in the industry, maybe your level or your seniority. These things are possible and they're actually happening. If you think about moving into different phases of career growth or development, and I start to think about, I want to grow my skills, suggested learning is a big one. If I actually say, I say something personal for me, I would like to grow my knowledge of privacy and data information protection. Well, if I noted that on a career profile or on my own individual profile as a skill I would like to learn, systematically, why not have learning suggestions pop up for me or a learning curriculum curated for me based on my own career existing profile persona, but what I would like to become. So these are examples of things where really you can start to move the needle in many ways, and it creates a much more engaging experience. I would lastly say on this, big things now are also, I don't want to lose sight of internal movement or internal mobility. If we're talking about career growth and development and the talent cycle, internal individuals oftentimes are where it's really, I'd say, oftentimes where there should be a higher focus, and it's one where many companies are starting to put a brighter focus, is on that internal experience. So for example, if your company is not yet using gigs, well, might be an idea. There are many platforms that offer it, but guess what? There are many platforms that also allow, based on your information, you may complete a brief survey, it will suggest gigs to you based on your time allocation, based on your skills, based on where you'd like to go. So another way to sort of bring that into the mix there instead of hunting and people down to find your gig, suggest them. People may get pop-ups. They can express their interest. Similarly, when internal jobs appear, so often many of us don't even know if there's another job that has been made available. Well, what if you had a system that based on your skills, your knowledge, your interests, and where you'd like to go in your career would suggest new permanent internal roles for you if you were looking? This is all possible leveraging machine learning, AI, and the power of technology. So I'm going to move into, again, this slide is pithy. I'm going to move into the next and talk a little bit about, this is going to hit a little bit, I mentioned at the very top, having a journey-based model is important. For conversational purposes, let's just imagine that we have this sort of these phases of a life cycle, right? And it starts with maybe join and starts with leave. You can use whatever words, phrases, whatever you may want, but this is illustrative. But imagine a path, and this is kind of how I try and think about this. It is a path. We are all on a journey. We're walking a path through our corporations. And so if at the very beginning, if I could, like I just mentioned, have as a candidate, see jobs that are relevant to me based on my skills or interests, what a great thing there. If I could go into, say, the interview stage and have interviewers match to me based on some of my skill preferences or maybe my skill deficiencies and have interviewers auto-suggested, that could be a really impressive way of helping to move the needle on intelligent interviewing, diverse interview slates, and interviewer slates that actually may match better with that particular candidate or that job. If you move on through, right? One of my favorite things is, you know, career hubs or places to go. If there is a hub or a landing spot for an employee to go, that is always a value versus having to go to multiple technologies or systems. If you don't have that, that's fine. But imagine a place where you could go and you're looking for a mentor. And based on, let's say, a number of dimensional factors, college, maybe it's where someone grew up, if that's what you would like to factor in on, skills, experience, skills you like to learn. Maybe there's a type of mentor you want. Systems can automatically match people with potential mentors. So again, this is all tapping into this sort of skills I'd like to gain, skills I have, skills that maybe I've left behind that I just do not want to invest in any further. Maybe they just weren't of interest to me any longer. When you start to build up this repository of skills and you factor it in to the journey and the entire life cycle, right, of an employee, from candidate or prospect all the way through, when they decide to maybe leave the company, there's rich possibility that is there. But the trick, I would say, and one of the big lessons, and I think this is pervasive among most technologies now, we're going to hone in on the journey work and really focus on this talent journey here. Skills are the new currency. Skills are what have been defined, and many vendors will say this, but there are many articles published that reference skills being the new currency in the industry. And if that is where the industry is going to go when looking at new opportunities, when looking at candidates, when looking internal, when looking at promotions, movement, talent adjustments, organizational shifts, or even reorganizational changes, having that skills information can help draw so many interesting decisions, so many points, and really is something that is transferable and relatable to any employee across geography, across level, and across their level of experience, number of years of experience or professional experience. So again, that's really where a lot of places, a lot of companies are investing their time, is on this sort of skills journey. So again, different steps here. I just would leave the reminder, I think an employee journey is a great thing to have. If you want to talk about that later in different ways to tackle that, I'd be happy to talk. But that is a whole entire conversation within itself. I at least wanted to frame it up in the life cycle of an employee. This thing, I'm not going to hit on this very much, but what I will also say is, I just said the whole company, right, is going to benefit from machine learning and from some of these talent elements and some of these other components. But really, whatever you may call these individuals, whether they're recruiters, if your organization, you might call them talent partners, talent managers, who knows, your HR business partners or your HR business consultants, all of these individuals have value that is being driven out of leveraging skills and machine learning. People leaders, right? A manager, right? Or even a people leader of a broader organization. So much information can come if you start to automate and really have a handle on your whole organization and what all of your teammates are looking at. There's a lot of great dashboards, notifications. If you have a high performing individual, there are insights you can gain there as well. So again, we're not just talking about an individual employee or a candidate. We're talking about the whole of what HR could offer and the different roles part of these processes. That's really where you're going to see a lot of value and a lot of benefit. And it does cut across all of these individuals. So this is a slide, some examples of where skills can go. This one is, again, another sort of a roadmap view. I just showed you a slightly different. Maybe it's a view we want to show your leader of what we have enabled. Here's what maybe what's coming available or we're working on. Maybe here's what's available we haven't turned on. Here's what's coming down the road. I would say skills, again, are emerging. And a lot of this can be driven by HR system. But if you think about it, I alluded to several things throughout this conversation. The next generation of skills is going to be, how do we get additional data, add more data points, get more feedback? So let's say you're doing a skills rating and you say, I am a COBOL expert. Well, what if we actually want to validate that? Do we want to send people to do third-party assessments that would then help to validate? By the way, that's also an AI, ML sort of component as well too. Does that factor back into someone's skill proficiency rating? Would that help? So with feedback from others, kind of like a LinkedIn social network where people provide endorsements or recommendations, that sort of pseudo feedback process, does that help to understand someone's skill depth, breadth across the board? So there's many capabilities that are out there, and that you do not have to be limited necessarily by your core HR platform. And they may look and vary for you. But again, I would always articulate this in terms of, you're going to have these different personas, right? And they're at the top. I'm big into personas. And then you ultimately have, what are you working on? What is available you need to work on? What's in place and what may be coming? So with that, I wanted to take you on a day in the life. I'm going to offer you up 3 personas here, and we're going to go through them each individually to kind of bring more flavor to this, very specific to talent and talent development. And so here you'll see we have our 3 individuals, Jules, Charlie, and Max. I have noted just under them example journeys, just to bring that point home further, because it's fairly, if you're thinking in that paradigm, and many of you probably are, may be helpful to think about it that way. But I want to take each of you through a day in the life for each of these individuals. I think this may help to bring this whole message and all of this content together in a really meaningful way. So let's start with Jules. All right. So Jules has been working in advertising for 17 years, okay? She heard that company A has great benefits and a great culture, and she is really interested in taking next steps with career A. Very similar scenario. This is an external candidate. And so when you think about what can happen with AL and machine learning, essentially it always starts in the same place. A hiring manager is going to generate a job requisition for the director of advertising. And, they may actually say, okay, on that job rec, we're going to add some suggested skills that should go along with that. So there are multiple paths here, because I said there are multiple personas. Let's say Julie initiates it. Well, again, wouldn't it be amazing if, skills from her last application or from her resume were populated? That would be great. What if she could actually find a role or a quick fit by looking at suggested jobs, or actually going in and doing some other sort of searches on skills that may be applicable to what she has in her pocket, right? So she actually fills out the application, she uses suggested skills, it all flows. And that's one way this path could follow. And of course, at the end, you always do finish. In this case, the recruiter hiring manager can view Julie's candidate experience skills, and the manager can decide, hey, I want to select Julie for the role, or not, or Jules, shall I say, as I suddenly started saying Julie there for a second. So my apologies. But let's take another path, right? Let's say the recruiter initiates it. Jules hasn't even applied yet. A recruiter could actually go and use, there's different components, find candidates, or your CRMs may offer some of these capabilities. But I want to go look for people that have these skills in my existing repository of people that have applied. So actually, a recruiter can go in, can use this sort of search capability. They could create maybe a pool, right, where they want to start to gather these individuals. And that pool can actually generate and show a population of individuals and show percentage of skill matches, right? For Jules, as an example, maybe she's a 75% match on all skills. Maybe there are certain skills weighted higher, but that can help the recruiter move through the process a bit further in looking at their population and the candidates. And then lastly, let's say, oh, Jules was selected. You can ask someone to invite them to apply, and then you move on to the finish step. Lastly, this is different, right? So let's say this is a scenario where maybe someone is the talent manager or the talent partner, or someone behind the scenes in the talent organization is doing this, not a recruiter either. Someone could actually go in and use, again, some of the same capabilities and think about moving some of these candidates into succession pools or plans, saying, oh, if Chris were to leave his job, I want to have a running candidate pool of individuals. Let me create and curate this search. Let me try and find a way to move this pool in place. So I've got at least something there. If Chris were to leave, here are some good successors outside of the company we may want to consider. That stays and remains. But if you take that further, you could also then say, maybe there are other roles where this pool of succession candidates would be valuable for it. So again, the same logic would apply. So this director of advertising job, maybe Jules was added as a potential successor to someone and in the advertising world, and suddenly her dream job opened up, but it wasn't that exact role. Using the AI and ML, if it's captured in a pool or somewhere within the platform, the recruiter can then tap into that, and then this candidate, Jules, could be suggested as an individual for that job. So again, my point is it's all leveraging some of the same capabilities and functionalities, except it's different people taking different paths. And that's what I would want to show. If you get anything out of this today, is all of these services and capabilities are available to all. And that is the goal. It may not be at first, maybe it is just the candidate, but if you can start interweaving this across all of the different groups and participants part of the process, you're cultivating a really unique culture that is built in skills, but also it is tied back to the same consistent processes. It's focused on some automation. It's focused on efficiencies, and you start to see some of those gains and process consistencies really starting to manifest in your organization. We're going to be hitting time here soon. I definitely want to save time for questions. I'm going to quickly go through one more example for you. And there's one, if we have time at the end, we can always bring it up for Q&A. Let's say career growth. All right, let's take Charlie, and I'll go through this one fairly quickly. I'm Charlie. I've worked at company A for 9 years, and I love being a technician. All right. So Charlie took a course on growth mindset and now wants to learn new areas of the business and see what else he could actually be good at. So you can imagine the next slide. It's going to start with the place. Charlie's doing well and would like to explore more opportunities within the broader enterprise. In this case, again, Charlie can initiate. He is the internal, employee. He can go to, say, if there's a career center or a career hub, update his career profile, add new skills. Charlie can be self-assessed, can do proficiency ratings on his own skills, right? Through that, what actually happens is Charlie gets suggested learning courses as well too along the way. So they see some matches in jobs or things that might be interesting. Maybe they have a skill they don't exactly have, and the system says you're lacking this skill or you don't have quite enough. Maybe here are some learning courses you might take to heighten that a bit. So really another way to think about how you're going to grow in the talent space and tying now recruiting, talent management, performance management, and learning sort of all together in this suite. So ultimately, Charlie goes through, he takes some of these learning courses, and guess what? He does start to grow his career, and ideally he rises to the top of maybe Slate reports and ends up being a candidate through going through and posting or looking for jobs or finally finding the right match. Similarly, a manager can initiate this. So here we go back to the people leader. A manager can actually go in and help to assess Charlie's skill levels. He may talk with Charlie or he or she, sorry. Anyone, let me remove pronouns. Anyone as a people leader could go in and actually assess what Charlie may bring to the table and add that. And that people leader can then say, nominate Charlie for new roles or new jobs or new things based on information they're getting systematically, alerts, notifications for new jobs, new gigs for their teammates. If that was a world, now you start to have the people leader engaged, the partners engaged, the business engaged, the individual engaged. You really are starting to build, again, this sort of circular process, this circular communication where everyone is sort of following and using the same technologies, following the same processes, following the same techniques and tools, just in slightly different ways. And of course, the outcome is always the same. Hopefully we want Charlie to be presented with new career opportunities with Company A. For time, I'm not going to go through the rest of this. I will say I did have another example here. It was going to be an internal applicant. This is Max, and he actually wants to use some of his data science skills that's going to go into a gig. But I would say for the time being, I think I will give it a pause and wrap the presentation at this point and just say, I'm ready for a bunch of questions. Hopefully there are some. I'm sure they've been quickly accumulating, and I would open it up to the broader group. And I just want to wrap by, always, I'll say it again, but thank you. Thank you for listening to this. And again, this is just a starter conversation. There is so much here that we could talk about for days. Literally, I obsess about this. So if anyone would like to connect, reach out, engage, I'm always happy to do that as well.
Hello, everyone. I've actually switched into some headphones just because it is easier to chat as we're talking through this. Hopefully that resonated with individuals. This is such a deep topic, and there is much that we can go into. Definitely have been some questions that have come into play here. If anyone does have any additional questions, please feel free to post those in the chat, and we can answer those. But I'm going to go ahead and take at least a couple that have already come through. One mentioned here that, we've obviously been talking about talent, recruiting, different areas like that. Question was, what about AI and machine learning in the performance management space? Here's what I would say about that. There are some components, especially some machine learning capabilities, and also some AI related activities that can be done in performance management. I will say this starts to get into a slightly dicey situation, at least in our experience and my experience, where when you start to bring, machine learning into, let's say, performance management, where there's feedback involved and there's evaluations and there's calibrations perhaps and all of these different elements, that sometimes the machine learning or some of the AI components may actually add inadvertent bias into the process. And so, it's a good question because it hits on this point of bias and adverse impact, especially in this particular domain. So, I think when anytime you're looking at leveraging tools, first of all, there are a set of standards for AI and machine learning that have sort of been published. Some of those were presented by a consortium of individuals. There's also a common set of sort of standards. At Comcast, we've actually adopted what we would say is sort of what would be our evaluation criteria for leveraging an AI or a machine learning technology or even branching into automation. One of those big factors is bias and adverse impact. And so, if you think about it, we've even had some scenarios in our cases where, some of our job suggestions maybe aren't quite aligning to the right individuals. And secondly, maybe some job recommendations are going to individuals that aren't quite qualified for those roles. These are all things you have to take into account. I will say with machine learning too, it has to build knowledge. So especially early up front, right? If we're tapping into algorithms, the more information, the better some of the results may be. So even early on in some of our rollouts of some of these new capabilities, we experience some of this. And so absolutely understanding the algorithm as much as you possibly can if you're using machine learning, definitely going by a set of criteria, checklist, absolutely engaging with leadership and having conversations all lead to what is the right solution for your organization. I will tell you right now, we've made a decision to not bring this into our performance management capabilities because of these very reasons. That being said, we do monitor and we look for feedback, NPS. We constantly audit. Actually, there's a monthly audit now that's in place in addition to some regular audits. Some of the responses, some of the suggestions, things that are happening to ensure that we are trying to prevent against that adverse impact or bias. So it can be difficult, which is also why I would add on to this, sometimes dip your toes into some of this. I think that is critically important. Another great question, what are some of the common misconceptions about AI? I think one of the biggest, and there's an element of truth to this, is when people hear artificial intelligence, machine learning, when you think about your employee base and when you start to use some of this, one misconception is that oh, this is going to, well, in creating efficiencies or creating, tighter alignment and processes and bringing people together, that some of this might lead to role eliminations or, staff efficiencies or staff reductions. I will tell you that, yes, that is certainly a factor in some cases. But in large part, when you think about it, and if you can explain the differences between true automation versus leveraging artificial intelligence or machine learning for insights, for recommendations, for helping to provide guidance, those are not necessarily things that directly may impact or be driven out of trying to achieve a staffing efficiency. In many ways, these are ways or techniques to increase engagement more than anything else, and to increase individuals' interactions with the platforms that you may have at your individual companies. So I would say that's one misconception. I think the other is that every AI or machine learning capability is brilliant, right? I have had experiences where we have piloted or prototyped some new technologies or tools that we thought were great on paper, but when you got into the details of it, the solutions weren't quite ready for prime time, right? So another misconception is, I would say, is that, with everything that's emerging, with everything that's coming up, you're seeing lots of opportunities and lots of offers coming, especially in this talent learning world we have here. Not every tool is great. Not every tool is as mature as it should be. And so I would just say that in evaluating or thinking about what may work for your company or your employee base, don't always take solution with the, at face value. Take time to evaluate, to dig in with, whether it's built internally or built externally. Dig in with your partners, understand the nuances, really go through that evaluation, because not every AI or machine learning solution is ready or is meant to be used, candidly, depending on your environment or your infrastructure. Another question that's come up is, it's kind of tied back to this, maybe back to the impact component, is how in the world do you anticipate, an entire employee base being ready to handle all of this? Some of it's fresh, some of it's new. Let me be really clear on one critical thing. Anytime you're about to roll out an enterprise function, and if it includes some of these, this goes without saying for any solution largely, but especially when you're talking about newer technologies, which may seem, I'm not going to say scary, but may seem, a little puzzled or quizzical by some of your recipients. Training, communication, adoption is absolutely essential. There's no way at Comcast we would have been able to roll some of these solutions out had it not been for a very thoughtful and planned approach for how are we going to get the message out? How are we going to bring people up to speed, educate? And let me tell you, sometimes that is a slow roll. You need to start slowly and then build in. So I cannot underestimate or undermine the criticality of that additional support structure of the method, the communication, the awareness, the education, and also going from a top-down sort of approach. If your leaders are engaged, if your leaders understand, there is much better chance of adoption, but also helping them to be able to distill messages down can also be a very effective tool. I will also say, never do all of this at once. That's probably a critical point. From personal experience, there have been scenarios where we have gone in and tried to roll out 3 or 4 solutions at one time. That doesn't always land well, because the change element does require individuals to take a step back. And so a great lesson learned, and something I would impart upon this group, is, again, back to the phasing and the roadmap. Think very logically about how, when you might want to phase some of these efforts in. Many of them build upon one another. But again, just like we're all learning, all of our employee groups, our candidate groups, our leaders are all learning in this entire journey. And so you have to think very pragmatically and strategically about the timing, the flow, and how you might order and structure some of these activities. So I think we're about out of time. I will just say thank you again for a fantastic time. Thank you for the questions, and thank you obviously to this organization for having me.